Today I want to talk about 2 words you can add to any sales presentation, a video sales letter, a webinar, a one-on-one sales call, whatever it might be, that for me increased my conversion by 74.6%, and it's one of the most simple things in the world. Now, I originally learned this because there were rumors in the public speaking world about this guy who would get on stage, he would do a presentation, he was so good at closing that people would literally line up behind him in a row. He'd hold his credit card up, they'd have their credit cards, and he'd walk them to the back of the room. They called him the Pied Piper. And I heard rumors about this guy for years while I was learning public speaking. I was learning to go to seminars and speak at stages, and they kept saying, have you ever heard Ted Thomas speak? He's literally the Pied Piper. And I was like, no, this sounds crazy. I remember one day going on YouTube and Googling Ted Thomas, and I found a video clip of him. He was at a Robert Kiyosaki event, and sure enough, he's walking around with his credit card in hand, and there's this line of people following him to the back of the room to buy his products and services. I heard also rumors, they said Ted Thomas is the king of this really, really simple concept called trial closes. You may have heard of the word trial closes before. I'd heard of them before, but I didn't really know exactly what they were, or more importantly, how to actually use them. If you rewind back about 12 years ago, I was speaking at an event, I was on stage, I was doing my presentation, there's probably 250, 300 people in the room. And as I start my presentation, I look out and all of a sudden I see him sitting towards the back. It was Ted Thomas. He walked in and sat down. And I'd never met him before, but I was like, oh no, this is like the Pied Piper himself, the king of closing, sitting there in the room watching me. And so for me, I get all nervous and like what if I mess up? What's he gonna think about me? And all the fear and all the anxiety is going through my head. And I thought, you know what? I just gotta do what I do because I've got an audience here. I need to do my presentation. I need to sell something. And so I went in and I did my traditional Russell Brunson sell, and it went well. The presentation went well. When I did the offer stack, it converted well. We had not really a big table rush, but people were running to the back and buying the product, and I was kind of proud of myself. And when it all said and done, everyone was buying the product, they were going to lunch, kind of filtering out of the room, and pretty soon there's just a handful of people left in the room. One of the guys I see across the way is Ted Thomas. He's got a big old smile on his face, and I'm like, oh man, I'm curious what he thought. He comes over and he's like, Russell, that was so great. It was great to watch you sell. You did an awesome job. Can I take you to lunch? I was like, sure, that'd be awesome. So he takes me to lunch, and we're sitting there talking, and he's asking me questions, and we're having a good time, and I'm getting to know this guy who's like a living legend. And as I'm talking, unbeknownst to myself, my head was nodding like this, and I was like paying attention to everything he's saying. I was like sucked into every word. And we're talking, and all of a sudden he stops. He's like, Russell, look at your head. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, oh. He's like, do you know what you've been doing right now? I'm like, no. He's like, your head's been nodding the whole time we're talking. And I was like, okay. And he's like, do you know why you're doing that? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's a nervous twitch, I'm really awkward, I don't really know what it is. He's like, no, for the last 15 minutes I've been using what I call trial closes on you. He's like, have you ever heard of a trial close? I'm like, yeah, I've heard of that before. He's like, do you know what it is? I'm like, not really. And then he told me this thing that changed my life forever. He said, when I watched you present today, Russell, I was sitting in the back of the room and I was watching you do your presentation, which was great. He's like, but I've noticed everybody's heads. If you look at the entire audience from the back, their heads were all sitting there, listening, paying attention, taking notes. Everyone was very focused on you. He's like, but if you watch me speak from the back of the room, he's like, you look at everyone's heads, their heads look like waves of water. Everyone's heads are going like this the entire time. He's like, the reason why, he's like, I'm using this little thing called trial closes. He said, all trial closes is something very simple. I'm trying to get somebody to say yes. So I ask them very simple questions. Like, are you getting this? Does this make sense to you? And the person's like, yes. Yes. He's like, what happens is that you're speaking one to many, you're speaking on stage, you'll see people's heads shaking yes over and over and over again. He's like, what happens is that person's saying yes to you over and over and over again. He's like, before I ever ask for the sale, he's like, traditionally, I've had that person say yes to me 500, 600, 700 times before I ever ask them the big yes, which is, will you buy my product? He's like, that's what trial closes are. And I was like, that's so fascinating. And I was like, where do you use them? He's like, I use them everywhere. He's like, I was using them on you right now while we're talking. He's like, I'm dropping little trial closes, little yeses where you're saying yes, and your head's nodding. He's like, if I was to ask you to do something, he's like, I've already committed to you. You've already said yes to me a dozen times before I ask the big yes. He's like, but this works anywhere. He's like, it works when you're selling from stage, it works on video sales letters, it works on webinars, it works on everything. And as soon as he said that in my head, I started thinking, because at the time I had a webinar that was doing really, really well. On average, in fact, I have to note, this is not me guessing, this is the actual statistical numbers I have written here inside this book. I shared a case study in this book, 108 split test winners back in the day. I was averaging $9.45 for every single person who registered for my automated webinar. When he told me about trial close, I was like, man, this webinar is doing well, but I didn't even know what trial close was. And so I remember on the flight that day, flying home, before I left, I messaged my brother who had done all the video editing on the webinar. I said, hey, can you send me a transcript of the webinar really quick? So he grabbed the video, he uploaded it. My brother sent me the transcripts, and on the flight home, I started going through the entire transcripts thinking, where can I insert trial closes into this webinar presentation? And I found there were kind of 3 core places to insert. Number 1 was after testimonial. A lot of people do is they'll show a testimonial and they kind of go on. And what Ted Thomas taught me is that when you talk about testimonials, like stop right there and add some trial closes. So for example, if I show a testimonial, I might say, isn't that awesome? They said, yes. Like, can you imagine yourself doing what that person just did? He said, yes again. Like, are you getting this? yes again, right? Even saying the word right is like yes, right? I'm saying these little words to get them to say yes. So he's like, if you drop a testimonial, he's like, instead of just moving on, he's like, ask 5 or 6 trial questions in a row to get them saying yes, 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 in their head, both consciously, subconsciously, and get their head nodding, right? Number 2 is after features and benefits. Because a lot of people talk about a feature or benefit of their product and just kind of move on, right? So show the feature and then go and ask a couple trial closes about specifically, like, would this work for you? Like, would this increase how fast you could get your work done? Like, would this, and start asking trial closes again, right? Another one, every time you introduce a new thought or a new concept, drop some more trial closes. In this book, actually, I literally time-stamped it out. So I wrote back in here, you can kind of see it real quickly here. 3:22, I was like, there's a trial close. At 3:59, there's a trial close. A minute 4:47, a trial close. So I went through the entire transcript, started writing these trial closes in there, right? Here was the phrase in the webinar. I said, everyone's talking about providing internet marketing services to local businesses. The first one I wrote is, you've probably heard them talk about this, right? Boom, trial close. It's good because it's working. It's a really good thing, don't you think? Boom, 2 more trial closes. So at 3:59, I was talking about this concept, so I dropped 2 trial closes. Number 1, would you like to learn about this loophole? Yes. Can you imagine what a shortcut this would be to your success? Yes. And I went through the entire webinar. So I would go and I wrote out all these trial closes. And initially my plan was to go back and re-record the webinar, inserting these trial closes, but I ran out of time. So I told my brother who's editing, I'm like, I want to try a test just to see if this actually works. And so I sat down with the microphone and I just read these trial closes. And I gave my brother a timestamp for when he needed to insert them. So I'm literally saying, does this sound good? Can you imagine doing this in just one day? This type of stuff is happening every day. Isn't that exciting? Would your family be impressed with those kind of profits? Are you ready to live the same dream? I'm sure you are. Have you ever asked yourself that? Am I right? Do you realize how much opportunity is waiting for you guys right now? Do you already have that desire for change? So I started taking all these, I recorded them on my microphone, I sent my brother the audio file. I'm like, can you just go and weave these timestamps in? Let's just see if this is gonna work. And so he took these little audio files, he weaved them into my presentation just to do a test, just to see what would happen. So we put it in there and we started testing the original version of the auto webinar versus this new one. And the only difference between the two were trial closes. That was it. Very simple, very easy. I wanted to see what the results were. And what was crazy for me is when all was said and done, it went from averaging $9.45 for every single person who registered the webinar to $16.50 for every registrant. And the only difference were trial closes. Now, after this happened, I became mildly obsessed with trial closes, and I started figuring out, like, how can I start adding these in everything I do? And so when I was speaking at a webinar or a teleseminar or on a video sales letter or on a YouTube video or anywhere, I started stopping. And every time I would introduce something, I would stop and ask a question. Does that make sense? You guys getting why I would do that? Because it would get someone to say yes and drop some trial closes, right? Do you think that would help you in your videos or your presentations as you're making them? Okay, I just dropped 5 trial closes right there for you. Boom, 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 right? You said yes 5 times. Those are trial closes getting you into the state of saying yes over and over and over and over again. So that's what a trial close is, and something you can simply weave into any of the presentations that you're currently doing. This is something I've been teaching people. I've been running these training programs and I teach people one-to-many selling. When you're selling one-on-one, it's different than when you're selling one-to-many, right? One-on-one, I could ask you a question and figure out what your concerns are and try to resolve them. When I'm selling one-to-many inside of group audiences, again, through a live event, like a big seminar on stage, or if I'm doing it on a webinar or on a video like this, I don't have the ability to go and like resolve all your concerns one at a time. So instead, I got to figure out what are the ways to get that person to say yes, get that person to take their false beliefs and to break them. Like, what are all the ways I can do it? And one of the most powerful, most simple things you can do are trial closes. This is something that when I first started doing trial closes, I didn't know how to do them. In fact, I asked Ted Thomas, like, how do you get used to doing this? This feels so weird at first. He told me what he did. He said, I would take these note cards and I would write trial closes on the note cards, a whole stack of them. And he said, when I speak on stage, I lay them out all over the ground on the stage. And as I'm speaking, I walk over, I step on one, I look down, I see the trial close, and I would drop the trial close. I walk over here, step on down, I would see the trial close. I remember thinking, I was like, oh, that's such a powerful, simple way. Now for me, I was doing webinars, so I thought, how can I do the same thing? So what I did is I got a pack of sticky notes and I wrote a whole bunch of trial closes on it. And what I do is on my monitors, I'm doing my presentation, I started putting these sticky notes all over the monitor, all over the walls, on the desk around me. So I was giving my presentation, I'd be looking down, I'd be like, boom, there's a trial close. Oh, boom, there's a trial close. And start weaving these trial closes into my actual webinar presentations. And I remember I started teaching a lot of my students this. In fact, one of my favorite people, Natasha Hazlett, I taught her trial closes. And she's like, first I felt really weird, but she's like, I was doing my presentations, I would ask my audience to trial close. I'm like, is this making sense to you guys? Are you guys getting this? And she's like, I felt kind of cheesy at first, but she's like, it was crazy. It's after my last big event. She's like, I had 3 or 4 people come up to me and they told her, said, I'm so grateful that you were making sure we understood the information. Like, you weren't just rattling through, you were asking us each time, like, are you guys getting this? Is this making sense to you guys? And she's like, it was cool because the hidden benefit wasn't just that we're getting them to say yes, the hidden benefit is that people felt like I cared more because I was asking their opinion. I was getting their feedback along the way the whole time. So that's what trial closes are. It's one of the most simple, powerful ways that you guys can increase the way you are converting on everything that you are doing, any kind of video, audio, any kind of message you are putting out there into the world. Now, this is the book, again, we used to sell in the past, but we no longer actually sell this, so you can't get a copy of it. But if you want to see all my trial closes, I am giving this away for free to people who are inside of our community. It's a new community we have created with people who are trying to learn and understand how to sell online. If you want to come hang out with us and get off social, I have a chance to talk to you and actually get in a spot in a community where we can talk together. All I want you to do is come to hangoutwithrussell.com, come hang out over there, and when you join the group, I will send you a free PDF of this book. That way you can go literally to page 136 and get a copy of the article, 2 Tiny Words Increase My Conversion by 74.61%, and you can see all the trial closes I use, and you can copy and paste those into your presentations to help you increase your conversions as well. That's thank you guys so much. I hope the trial closes help you to increase your conversion and change more of the lives of people that you've been called to serve.